Okay, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I pray you're all well. Let's start then. Al-Fatiha. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. إياك نعبد ونستعين. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما تعلمنا وزدنا من فضلك علما وعملا وقربا يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم زدنا ولا تنقصنا وأكرمنا ولا تهنا وأعطنا ولا تحرمنا وآثرنا ولا تؤثر علينا وأرضنا وارض عنا يا أرحم الراحمين ويا أكرم الأكرمين. Okay, Bismillah. We're trying a slightly different format today. I'm not streaming the class. We're just going to be I'm doing local recording. We'll see how that works, and then we'll upload it, inshallah. Okay, so Bismillah, Alhamdulillah. So last time we talked about water and the types of water, and today we're going to continue the discussion on water, about Najis water, impure water, and what is considered impure water. And so basically, when it comes to impure water, there are three broad categories: flowing water and still water, which is divided into a small amount of water and a large amount of water. So in the text, he talks about a ghadir azim, and so basically, so we're going to treat a large amount of water and flowing water similarly, and then there's a small amount of water, and so we're going to look at the definition of the small amount of water, how it developed in the school, and how it ended up. So this is the interesting part, because when you look at when you look at certain books, you just end up with the hasil and the khulasa, and this is what the awam, that's beneficial for people that are not specializing in this study. That you just give them the nutshell, and sometimes they can think that this is it, and there isn't any other position, which in one perspective is correct. But just to see the background for it all, and then you look at other works and you see how all the other discussions fit together, and then you see, I've left the other lights on, it doesn't matter. And you see how the discussions fit together, and you see how the conclusion has arrived. For example, if you study Aqidah, you'll see, for example, they say Sifat al-Qudra, and then so like in the Shuruh of the Jawhar, they say Sifatun Azaliyatun Qa'imatun Bidhatihi Ta'ala, and يصحح به وجود كل الممكنات or something like that. And like the الإرادة صفة أزلية قائمة بذاته تعالى تخصص وجود بعض الممكنات, for example. And then when you read Imam Ghazali's الاقتصاد في الاعتقاد, he shows you how they arrived at this summary, and all the background discussion. So this is very similar to this, and it's very useful. So okay, let's see what it says. So it says مطلب في الماء الجاري إذا وقعت فيه النجاسة. This topic on flowing water when najasa falls. So the first, he says وأما الماء الجاري. So the first thing you need in things like this is you need to define your terms, right? And that's what they say in logic, لا مشاحة في الاصطلاح, right? There's no, like you can define whichever word however you want, as long as you make your meaning clear, so the opponent or the person you're discussing with knows what you mean. So, and this is one of the things where people end up, they have arguments over religious matters and others, and without what they call tahrir mahallun niza', specifying what exactly you're discussing, right? And they'll be talking about a broad thing, and they'll be differing about them with them, but another broad thing, not specifically. So here, the definitions in fiqh, the definitions in aqidah, these are very important points, right? And that's why the ulama spent time on these matters. So it says الإمام الميداني رحمه الله تعالى ونفعنا به وبكم. وهو meaning الماء الجاري ما لا يتكرر استعماله, right? um, so that's the position that he is mentioning. That's one position, right? And what does this mean? That whose use, that the water which is not used again, meaning when we think of flowing water, you think of, you open the tap, okay, it's flowing, it's going down the drain, done. But I've seen places, I saw a stream, I believe in Damascus, and it was really slow. It's flowing water, but it's just moving incredibly slowly. There wasn't much momentum behind it. So you have to look at these situations. You need a broad definition. So that who's not, that water which isn't used again. So let's say you get some of it, you wash your hands, and it falls down, and if you were to go get it, you're picking up the same water because it hasn't had time to flow, right? So this is not flowing water, right? So there has to be enough momentum that once you picked it up and dropped it, that water has moved away, right? And then it says, وَقِيلَ مَا يَذْهَبُ بِتِبْنَةٍ, right? A straw, right, of hay or something, that which will remove that. So he has enough strength to move something that light, right? And this is taken, both these are taken from the Hidayah. وَقِيل مَعْنَاهُ, sorry, مَا يَعُدُّهُ النَّاسُ جَارِيًا, and this is what people consider to be flowing, that's flowing. So in a particular context, what people say, no, that's flowing, it's not still water, then that's what we give it. And as you know, this goes back to the asl of Imam Abu Hanifa, which goes back to Ra'yul Mubtala. The person who's in the situation, what does he consider it, right? Very similar to that. قيل هو الأصح, that's one position from the Fath. وفيه, and in الفتح, وألحقوا بالجار حوض الحمام إذا كان الماء ينزل من أعلاه والناس يغترفون منه حتى لو أدخلت القصعة أو اليد النجسة فيه لا ينجس, right? And so then he says that's the asah, right? So what do people consider to be flowing water? There you are, right? So he's taken that from Fathul Qadir. So generally, if it's moving something, people will say it's flowing, right? But you put people in that situation. Is that still or is it flowing? And what they consider to be flowing, we say it's flowing, right? So a lot of the ahkam of tahara and these things are, like I said, yufawwadu ila ra'yi al-mubtala. Whoever's in that situation, he's the one that's going to be asked to decide. So he says in Fath al-Qadir, he says, with the jari, they've also given the same hukum to the hawd in a hammam. So you have a hawd, which is like a big basin of water in a public bath. And basically, it's like water comes out of it, trickles out of it, right? At a slow pace, right? إذا كان ينزل الماء من أعلاه, right? So because the water is coming out from the top of it, right? And وَالنَّاسُ يَغْتَرِفُونَ مِنْهُ, right? So they're putting their hands inside it, or they're putting containers inside it. There might be najas on them, right? But if the water's coming out of it, so it's fed from one area and it's coming out, right, from another area, so there's movement. That's also another actual definition of what they said, what flowing water is, right? مَا يَدْخُلُ مِنْ جَانِبٍ وَيَخْرُجُ مِنْ جَانِبٍ, what comes in from one side and leaves from another side, right? Which what some of the ulama say about washing machines, although that's a different discussion, but we'll leave that one for now. So this is what happens, right? So it's connected to, it has the same hukum as ma'ul jari, right? Because the water's moving, the water's coming, right? And they're putting their hands in, and because it's getting, they go into this area to have the bath, they put their hands in, whatever, as long as there's water coming into it, it's flowing. So that which people consider flowing water. So flowing water, what it does is it purifies. Flowing water is generally pure. We consider it as pure. Even so, there's a discussion in so for example the Hashf of Ibn Abdin. If you had a jug of water and if you poured it, right, and it's flowing now, the movement, would that purify it? And the khulasa is yes, right? So this is it. So he says, So as for وأما الماء الجاري إذا وقعت فيه نجاسة جاز الوضوء منه إذا لم يرى أثرها. Right? أثر sorry. إذا لم يرى لها أي للنجاسة أثر. Right? So this is the hukum. So water, it's sifata, it's also for what? Smell, taste, color. And najasa affects these awsaf, right? Physical impurity, it affects either the smell or the taste or the color of water. So if some sort of najasa was to fall into, like a drop of blood or a drop of urine or something like this, if it was to fall into some flowing water, it remains with the original hukum of tahara, in place, right? So it's still tahir if none of the traces of the najasa are present, right? So you go to a stream, for example, right? And someone vomits, right? And someone else maybe further down, um, you know they can see the water flowing past them, and let's say it's quite a clear stream. This person can see the rocks underneath and everything, and the water flowing past, and they can't see the najasa. If he was to pick up the water, it just smells like water, from outside. There's no taste, whatever. You consider that tahir, right? There's one thing I have to actually just clarify, and it's useful for for us as people trying to understand the books of the fuqaha, and it's useful to distinguish that, if you ever teach someone these things, that we distinguish between hygiene and tahara, right? Hygiene is one thing, that germs and these sorts of things, and you obviously approach that in a way which is sensical, and that which promotes health. But then sometimes you have a situation where, like we'll see later with wells, that something might not seem hygienic, but is it tahir? Yeah. So for example, like if a wasp was to die, what would happen? Like for example, in Jordan, you'd have these tanks on your roof. So flowing water comes through the system on the weekends, right? And so people save their washing and everything, clothes for the weekend, because the machines use a lot of water, the washing machines. But what about your normal, your other supply, where water for having a bath, making wudu, these sorts of things. So that's stored in a tank, and sometimes some of the old, now I think the modern tanks are big plastic ones, but some of the older ones are made of iron, right? And they can rust over time. So sometimes what happens is you get wasps, and entering the tanks, especially on a hot day, right? And the shades, they'll kind of go in there, and sometimes they go in, and there's more water than they expect, whatever, and they die there. So a wasp is something which it doesn't make the water impure, right? But let's say you come across this and you've seen this, and you're gonna make wudu. Are you gonna yes, it's a sunnah to rinse your mouth, but when there's a concern about putting that water in your body, that it could, you've seen about, a few dead wasps in there, right? It's not going to make it najis, but it's a place where you take precautions, right? So it's a scenario, you take precautions. So it might be, there might be some, germs and whatever, because of the death of this wasp, but is it still tahir? Yes, right? You could wash your face, arms, feet, your wudu's done, right? So this is an important factor for this. So he says, rahimahullah ta'ala, so if the flowing water has no trace of Allah, any najasa, and then this min once again is min bayaniya, min ta'min aw lawhin aw lawnin aw rih. So in that case it's jaza. Why? لأنها لا تستقر مع جريان الماء, because the najasa doesn't remain with the flowing of the water, right? قال في الجوهرة. So Imam al-Haddadi, he says, هذا إذا كانت النجاسة مائعة. This is if the najasa is liquid, right? Because a solid najasa, if it's going to stay there, you're going to see the physical trace of it. As for liquid, it's more likely to disperse with the rest of the water, right? So he says هذا إذا كانت النجاسة مائعة. أما إذا كانت دابة ميتة إن كان الماء يجري عليها أو على أكثرها أو نصفها لا يجوز استعماله. Right? So it's saying, as for the liquid is covered, but let's say you've shot an animal, right? You're hunting, you shoot an animal and it's running across a stream and it falls and it dies, or the animal's been attacked by a predator and it's escaped, but it dies, it falls in the water, it's collapsed, and it starts to decompose, right? It's najis, and water's flowing over this, right? Water's flowing over this carcass. So he says, if the water is flowing over most of the animal, right? عليها أو أكثرها أو نصفها. So half or more, we give it the hukum of most. Then you can't use that water. That's one position. وإن كان يجري على أقلها أو أكثرها. sorry, وإن كان يجري على أقلها وأكثره يجري على موضع طاهر وللماء قوة فإنه يجوز استعماله إذا لم يوجد للنجاسة أثر. And here's the point, right? So he said, if it's flowing over less than half of it, right? And most of the water, وأكثره, and most of that water, right, is, because you can imagine a small stream this animal's falling in, right? And most of that water is يجري وأكثرها, I missed it, I lost it. وأكثره يجري على موضع طاهر, and most of the water is flowing over an area where there's tahara. What do you do? وللماء قوة, and there's a lot of force in the flow, right? There's a lot of momentum to it. Then you can use that water. إذا لم يوجد للنجاسة أثر, and it comes down to this, right? This is what it comes down to. Underline this part. إذا فإنه يجوز استعماله إذا لم يوجد للنجاسة أثر, right? And so what you've got is you have this situation where even, let's say, water's flowing over this carcass and you go a bit further downstream, right? That water is going to be mixing with itself, and if you go a few meters, let's say 20-30 meters downstream, and you start making wudu, you can't smell anything, you can't taste anything, there's no odor to it, it's fine, you can use it, right? So pure water, as long as, if you see the smell, taste, color of najasa, no, you can't do it. But if you can't see it, you consider it tahir mutahhir. It's perfectly fine, right? Even if you're a small distance, a short distance from the source of the najasa, right? So pure water is pure and purifying, obviously. Flowing water is pure and purifying. Okay, right. So he says, wal ghadir, right? So this is a derived word from ghadara, from ghadara, to leave, right? You get called, as a foreigner, when you're trying to get your visa extended and whatever in Arab countries, you get called to the government, to the secret service building, and they have all these tricks and tactics to make you feel scared and whatever. They'll put you in a room where there's no stimuli, right? All there's is a picture of the ruler, and there's a window with iron bars outside so you can't escape, and just to make people feel nervous, and you sit there. And I got called a few times, and I was just like, yeah, isn't that funny? And the guys, they're like really stressed out. And so eventually, when you get everything done, you get a little slip where you can leave. It's called the mughadara, right? That, permission to leave. And yeah, one time I went, I had to get visa extension, and the guy on the phone who I called, he's like, yeah, go to Qa'a Ishrin. I'm like, room 20. I'm like, what? Like, what's room 20? He goes, just tell the taxi driver, he'll know. I'm like, all right. And it's taken from room 101 in George Orwell's 1984. The room where everyone, they're all scared of it, right? And so I told the taxi driver, I got in early morning and got in. He's like, Wayne, where are you going? I said, Qa'a Ishrin. He's like, he started like panicking. Oh my God, Qa'a Ishrin. Okay. So we get in or whatever, and I paid him at the end. He's like, Allah ma'ak, Allah ma'ak, Allah be with you. Really like afraid. And what was Qa'a Ishrin? it was just a room. You sat there till someone calls your name out. Anyway, مغادرة. So a ghadir, what is a ghadir? Is basically the original root Arabic word is like a pond or a certain amount of water that's collected, that's left after a flood. So when you have these, indentations in the ground where water could collect after a big flood has come, like you have these big ponds left there, right? That is a ghadir. So he says والغدير قال في المختار. What's مختار? مختار الصحاح or الصحاح. So it's a summary of this other work, dictionary. هو القطعة من الماء. Yeah. So it's a certain amount of water. يغادرها السيل. A flood leaves it behind. ومثله الحوض, and like a pond or something. Same ruling, right? العظيم. So here we're distinguishing between al-ma'ul qalil and al-ma'ul kathir, right? So we'll talk about that definition in a bit. But when it comes to al-ma'ul kathir, a large amount of water, he says وهو الذي لا يتحرك أحد طرفيه بتحريك الطرف الآخر. Right, so a large amount of water or a big pond here is so this is one definition, right? It says that whose one side of this water won't move if you go and move the other side with your hand. Or so there's a couple of positions, whether it's with your hand or whether you go make wudu there, or if someone wants to stand there and perform a ghusl. Basically, you're pouring water and you're dropping water back into that spot. As you know, water ripples, right? And sometimes the momentum of that ripple just cuts off, right? So it doesn't go all the way to the other side. So they're saying that if you were to move some of the water from one end, the other end you won't see the ripples get there, right? So that's one definition. So he says وهو قول العراقيين. That's the position of the Iraqi scholars, right? وفي ظاهر الرواية يعتبر فيه أكبر رأي المبتلى. Underline this. And this is the position in ظاهر الرواية. What's of concern and consideration is the conviction of the person in that situation, right? That if he says this is a large amount of water, great. But we're going to say that to distinguish a large and a small amount of water, the Mutaakhirin give a fatwa on one of the akhwal of Imam Muhammad, which we'll come to. But this was the position of the earlier school. So then he says, قال الزاهدي وأصح وأصح حده. No, وأصح حده, right? And the strongest definition of this large amount is ما لا يخلص بعضه إلى بعض في رأي المبتلى. So it's a large amount is that which the water from one of its parts won't end up reaching the water of the other part. So for example, let's say you've got a swimming pool outside, right? And if you were to get some ink, like let's say you get a 2-liter bottle of ink, right? And you pour it into that water. So you can see where that ink is going. It's going to color the water. And so he's saying, according to this what Zahidi quoted, that if the coloration through, I'm sure you all did osmosis in chemistry in high school, where water spreads when it's introduced to another body of water, it all mixes. The coloration of this doesn't spread to the other end. So obviously 2 liters poured into, say, a swimming pool of, say, 2000 liters, it's not going to do much, right? The coloration will spread to a certain degree, and then it doesn't have the potential to move beyond that, right? So that would be a large amount. But that's Zahidi's qawl. في رأي المبتلى. And in the رأي of the person in that situation, واجتهاده واجتهاده في رأي المبتلى واجتهاده, in the position, in the opinion, and the after him using some effort to conclude this. So his conclusion says that okay, it's a large amount, anything najas falling into one end won't reach the other. That's fine. ولا يناظر المجتهد فيه, and no one is called up about the ijtihad, that, like, okay, someone thinks, it will, and another person thinks it won't. So for him who says, najasa will get there, he can't make wudu. It's a small amount of water if najasa has fallen in. But someone else that says, no, it's fine, for him it's fine, right? So it's down to the ra'y of the mubtada. Okay. وهو الأصح عند الكرخي وصاحب الغايات والينابيع وجماعة. right. وفي التصحيح قال الحاكم الشهيد في المختصر، قال أبو عصمة كان محمد بن الحسن يوقت في ذلك بعشر. right. So يوقت means يحدد. So Imam Muhammad ibn Hassan used to do tahdid of what this amount is. So he said عشرة في عشرة ذراع في عشرة ذراع. So the ذراع that the author of the Hidayah mentioned, they say it comes to roughly about 46 centimeters. Many contemporary scholars say, look, it's, 50 centimeters, right? So half a meter. So ashar dhira is 5 square meters, 5 meters by 5 meters, right? So Imam Muhammad said, so he says, Abu Isma said, كان محمد بن حسن يوقت في ذلك بعشر. So 10 ذراع في 10 ذراع. ثم رجع إلى قول أبي حنيفة, and he said, وقال لا أوقت فيه شيئا. I'm not going to specify anything, right? Let whoever's in that situation determine that, right? فظاهر الرواية أولى, right? There's no تحديد. Okay. ومثله في فتح القدير والبحر قائلا, so he says in فتح القدير and البحر, he says إنه المذهب وبه يعمل, right? That's the madhab and that's what we're going to apply, right? رأي المبتدأ. Okay. وإن التقدير بعشر لا يرجع إلى أصل يعتمد عليه. And the taqdir of 10 by 10 ذراع, it doesn't return to, it doesn't have a basis that is relied upon. That's what Fathul Qadir said, Ibn Humam. There is a story where Imam Muhammad was asked about a small amount, and he pointed to like a place where the people make wudu in the mosque, al-Mida'a, and when they measured it, it came to that, right? That's what they're saying. But he's saying, what did Imam Muhammad base it on? He says that there's no sound religious basis for this, right? In terms of riwayat or something. So, so he says, لكن في الهداية, however in في هداية بعضهم قدر بالمساحة 10 في 10 بذراع الكرباس, right? توسعة للأمر على الناس. And so he's saying that some of the later scholars, they did taqdir of 10 by 10, right? And so obviously we know Fath al-Qadir is the sharh of the Hidayah came later, but this discussion, so we know what he concluded, and he's saying go with the Ra'i al-Mubtada, which is the position of Abu Hanifa. But what's the stronger position? It's actually the one that he's commenting on, what Sahib al-Hidayah said. Some of them did the taqdir of 10 by 10, right? في بذراع الكرباس, which comes to about 46.2 centimeters, right? So you can call it 50, right? Why? توسعة للأمر على الناس, to make this matter easy for people. Because if you're saying رأي المبتدأ, this guy's saying this is a small amount, that guy's saying no, it's a large amount, no, it's a small, it's a large, it's just going to lead to confusion, So and bearing in mind, like most people in the past throughout history have not had like a proper education where they can, like what's assumed to be a standard education in the West. Many people haven't had that, right? So when it comes to mathematics or just seeing measurements and these sorts of things, so there's the potential for confusion for people, even now in the educated world, right? People struggle with basic rulings, right? So there has to be something specific for them to facilitate this matter. That's what they're saying, right? توسعة للأمر على الناس. So he says وعليه الفتوى, and that's what the fatwa is, right? According to Sahib al-Hidayah. ومثله في فتاوى قاضي خان, right? Same thing in both giants. وفتاوى العتابي, so right. So then he quotes in الجوهرة النيرة وهو اختيار البخاريين as well, right? Which is the madhab of صاحب الهداية, the locality. وفي التصحيح وبه أخذ أبو سليمان يعني الجوزجاني, right? the student of Imam Muhammad. وقال في النهر الفائق, the شرح of كنز الدقائق by Umar النصفي, وأنت خبير بأن اعتبار العشر أضبط, right? It's more precise, giving, choosing this position and saying, look, 10 by 10 dhira, 5 by 5 meters, 5 square meters. It's a more precise, we see either it's, if it's square meters or if it's circular, this is 36. The Hashimi Ibn Abdin has a good breakdown of it, but it's easier for people because it's how, there's a clear distinction, small, large, right? So it says, وأنت خبير بأن اعتبار العشر أضبط, right? لا سيما في حق من لا رأي له من العوام, right? Especially for them. فلهذا أفتى به المتأخرون الأعلام, right? Like صاحب الهداية and the others, right? قال شيء انتهى. So انتهى means end quote, right? This Hamza with the ha. So it says قال شيخنا. Who's saying قال? The Sharih, Shaykh Abdul-Ghani al-Maydani. ومن شيخه Shaykh al-Allama Muhammad Amin ibn Abidin. And honestly, what, when you read the Hashiyah, when you look at the discussions and the way he looks, he takes so many conflicting positions and resolves the issues, and resolves the contradictions, and just his whole methodology and approach and how it's based firmly on the riwayat from the books and the rulings. It's just a masterpiece, honestly. He was just a genius, right? Rahimahullah ta'ala. So what does he say? قال شيخنا رحمه الله تعالى: ولا يخفى أن المتأخرين الذين أفتوا بالعشر كصاحب الهداية وقاضي خان وغيرهما من أهل الترجيح, right? They are the people of tarjih. They can look at the positions and the differing riwayat, and they can choose one, right? And we, being people that have significantly less knowledge and less grasp of the mechanics of the madhab than they do, and the strength of the riwayat and the adillah, we have to follow them, right? Just, this is qualified scholarship, right? And it's not just anyone. These people have been, their fiqh acumen has been assessed and praised and regarded significantly by generations of scholars after them, right? So this is Imam Ibn Abidin saying this. هم من أهل الترجيح هم أعلم بالمذهب منا. Here it is, right? They know the madhab better than us. فعلينا اتباع ما رجحوه. That should be همزة الوصل, not القطع. فعلينا اتباع ما رجحوه وما صححوه كما لو أفتونا في حياتهم. So we've got to follow the tarjih that they done and what they said. This is the strongest, soundest position. Just like if we were living in their times and we were in their neighborhood and we went to them to ask them a question, their fatwa for us would be binding, right? وفي الهداية والمعتبر. So that's that. So what is the distinction between a large and a small amount? It's 10 by 10, 5 by 5 meters, right? That's the position. And then so he also says, that's the surface area. What about the depth, right? والمعتبر في العمق أن يكون بحال لا ينحسر بالاغتراف, right? هو الصحيح. And when it comes to the depth, it's such that if you were to ينحسر, to become revealed, basically. So if you were to put your hand inside to take a handful, right? So how deep are your hands going to go? What, 10 15 centimeters, you put your hands in that much, and in doing so you won't touch the water, the bed, the soil underneath, right? So that's the depth, right? When you're taking a handful from it, or even less actually, right? And he says huwa sahih, right? And there is a position in the Hash of Ibn Abdin where he says that the depth isn't even looked at, right? And Wallahu alam. So he says done. So that's the large amount, right? We talked about. So flowing water and large amount of body. If najasa falls in and there's no smell, taste or color, fine, right? You treat it as tahir mutahhir. وإذا وقعت النجاسة وإذا وقعت نجاسة في أحد جانبيه جاز الوضوء من الجانب الآخر الذي لم يقع فيه نجاسة, right? Very clear, right? So water falls on one side of this large pond, you go to the other side where it hasn't, and it's fine. لأن الظاهر أن النجاسة لا تصل إليه, because the apparent, right, and we build ahkam on the apparent, is that the najasa, when it falls into one side, it won't reach the other side. الجانب الآخر, right? It won't reach the other side. So he says, why? لأن أثر التحريك في السراية فوق أثر النجاسة. Great. So he says, because the effect of the movement, right, in the effect that it has on the water is stronger than the effect of the najasa. For example, if you to get, say, a container of urine, for example, right, and if it was poured into the water, the najasa, yes, going to spread in that water, right, but let's say the pond is still and you pour it in, the water will spread, but the ripples, and the momentum of the fall of the liquid into the water, the effect it causes on the ripples is going to be much stronger than the actual spreading of the najasa, right? Meaning the ripples caused by it will travel further than the actual najasa itself does, right? That's what it's لأثر التحريك في السراية, in the movement, فوق أثر النجاسة, right? So he says قال في التصحيح, right? So he says in التصحيح وقوله جاز الوضوء من الجانب الآخر إشارة إلى أنه لا إلى أنه ينجس موضع الوقوع, right? So when you pour, with the najasa falls in, that place becomes najis. Wait. وعن أبي يوسف لا ينجس إلا بظهور النجاسة فيه كالماء الجاري. Underline that, that's the position, right? There you are. So if even when the najasa is fallen in, but if there's no trace of the najasa, right, then you treat it as tahir, right? No smell, taste, color. قال وقال الزاهدي اختلفت الروايات والمشايخ في الوضوء من جانب الوقوع والفتوى الجواز من جميع الجوانب. It's fine from any side, even the side where the najasa fell in. Obviously, if you pour some najasa into this water and you immediately start doing this, it's going to be there, right? So let's say some najasa fell there, and you come back a little while later and there's no trace of it at all. You can make wudu from that same spot, right? Okay. Allah. So وَمَوْتُ مَا لَيْسَ لَهُ نَفْسٌ سَائِلَةٌ. So nafs here means blood. Hey, damun sa'il. Right, that's one of the usages of nafs in the Arabic language. وَمَوْتُ مَا لَيْسَ لَهُ نَفْسٌ سَائِلَةٌ فِي الْمَاءِ. So those things which don't have, they might have some sort of circulatory system, but it's not blood that flows around, right? So it says ومثله المائع وكذا لو مات خارجه ألقي فيه, right? So this hukum applies to water and other liquids, right? So something that dies, something that doesn't have blood, like we said, wasps and these things, right? That if it was to like fish, they don't have blood, for example, right? But that's obviously got a different hukum. So something that doesn't have blood, and if it was to die in water, right? La yunajisuhu, or something that's died outside and it falls into water, is thrown into that water. La yunajisuhu. Why? Because adamul masfuh, that's najis, right? Flowing blood. But here it's not the case. Why? لأن المنجسة اختلاط الدم المسفوح بأجزائه عند الموت. Because what is the thing that actually makes this najis? It's the flowing blood which mixes with the liquid when it dies, right? To the point that blood, they say it has to be flowing blood, meaning blood which is flowing because it's being pumped by the heart of that living thing. So when you slaughter an animal and it's slaughtered, it's left there, and the blood keeps pumping out, and then eventually there's no more blood, right? The heart stops, and there's no more blood that's pumped out, and then they hang it up and whatever. And then if you go home, and then if you take this carcass, right, of let's say of a sheep that's been slaughtered, sacrifice, and it was, if it's to come into contact with water, or you're at home and you got some meat and it's got some blood there, it's not najis, right? You just wash it off, it's done, right? It's not najis. So he says, حتى حل المذكى, right? Such to the point that the thing which has been sacrificed, right, is halal, right? وطهر لانعدام الدم فيه. So the thing which you sacrifice, if you're to cut an animal, let's say you go cut its leg, whatever, and the blood comes out, whatever, it's it doesn't, it's not najis, but once you've slaughtered it properly, the meat is tahir, and there's no najis blood there from hidayah. وذلك, such as what? كالبق, right, like mosquitoes, right? والذباب, and flies, والزنابير, hornets. Man, these things are scary. They're really big, right? It's like, and they fly really slowly, honestly. Allah protect us. Okay. والعقارب, and scorpions, ونحوها. So that's one set of, insects. وموت ما يولد ويعيش في الماء فيه. Something that is born and it lives in the water also. It doesn't make it impure. Because, what you're going to say, like, you've got a pond and you make wudu from it, but something that lives in that pond and it dies in that pond, how many times does that happen? Thousands. And you say, oh, it's been najis all along? No. Right? So, وموت ما يولد ويعيش في الماء فيه أي في الماء وكذا المائع. Okay. وكذا, let me just move this slide. وكذا المائع على أصح. And the same thing, a liquid, something that lives in water, and if it dies in liquid, it won't, like other than water, for example, it won't make it najis على الأصح. وجوهر, so from hidayah and jawhara. وكذا لو مات خارجه وألقي فيه في الأصح. Same thing, if it dies outside and thrown in, same, from درر الحكام. لا يفسده وذلك كالسمك والضفدع. I like this word, ضفدع. It's a frog. المائي, right? وقيل مطلقا, because some live on land, I think toads or whatever, that's a distinction. Some live on land, right? And maybe they're born on land as well. But those that stay in the water pretty much the majority of the time, and they live in the water, them. وقيل مطلقا, that any sort of it, right? Hidayah. That's a weaker position. والسرطاني, and crabs, right? ونحوها. And it's interesting that the word for crabs is السرطان, and the constellation for the crab, is it Pisces? Yeah, I think it's Pisces. I could be wrong. It's a crab, and in Arabic, no, it's Cancer. Sorry, Pisces is the fish. So the constellation for it is called Cancer, and so the modern Arabic word for the illness, cancer, right? Allah protect us, is as-saratan, right? And they call it al-marad al-khabith. People don't like mentioning its name, tasha'um. Right? They don't like, the Arabs don't like mentioning its name. So anyway, it says والسرطان ونحوها وقيدت ما يعيش في الماء بيولد لإخراج المعي المعاش دون المولد كالبط وغيره من الطيور فإنها تفسده اتفاقا. So the qaid is put in the matan ما يعيش في الماء, right? وموت ما يعيش في الماء, right? So that wording, so he's put that to remove the possibility, the rational possibility of, animals that are born on land but they live mostly in water, like ducks and these sorts of things, right? Because a death of that you can treat it like something else from outside the water, it doesn't make it najis, right? So there he summarized the hukum of flowing water and still water, which is a large amount, so tahir, mutahir, and then the small amount of water, where even a drop of a small amount of najasa will make it najis, and the exceptions is talked about them. Okay, so now he's going to talk about used water, right? And as you know, the dominant position when it comes to used water is that it is tahir غير mutahhir, because there are positions in the school that said it's najis najasatan, was it khafifatan, and najasa ghalidha, Right? So he says, والماء المستعمل لا يجوز استعماله في طهارة الأحداث. So this is what he's saying. So we remember there's khabath and there's hadath. Khabath is physical impurity, and hadath, it's effective. What we call, it's not actual impurity, but it's been given the hukum of it. So like when you make wudu, it's removed. So when it comes to used water, like you made wudu with it and then you've collected it, it's fine when it comes to khabath. So let's say use used water and you collect it in a basin. Someone could use that for istinja, for example, right? But it's for the ahdath, which is a different hukum. قيد بالأحداث للإشارة إلى جواز استعماله في طهارة الأنجاس, physical actual impurities, كما هو الصحيح, no problem there. قال المصنف في التقريب روى محمد عن أبي حنيفة رضي الله عنهما أن الماء المستعمل طاهر, yeah, وهو قوله, Imam Muhammad's position as well, وهو الصحيح, that's the position, right? And that's what the basis is. وقال صدر حسام الدين في الكبرى وعليه الفتوى. وقال فخر الإسلام في شرح جامع الصغير إنه ظاهر الرواية وهو المختار. وفي الجوهرة قد اختلف في صفته, في صفة الماء المستعمل, what's the حكم of it, right? فروى الحسن عن أبي حنيفة أنه نجس نجاسة غليظة, because they say Imam Abu Hanifa had was given kashf and he would see the sins of people who are making wudu come off. So he's saying that that's what affects the water, the dhunub coming off, right? So najasatun ghalidha. وهذا بعيد جدا, and this is just like a really far-fetched position, so don't even think that being valid. وروى أبو يوسف Mr. وروى أبو يوسف عنه أنه نجس نجاسة خفيفة. Why? Because najasat, where there's اختلاف in them, customers خفيفة, right? وبه أخذ so some meaning اختلاف, some say it's طاهر, some say نجاسة غليظة, like that. So وبه أخذ مشايخ بلخ وروى محمد, so that's what they took. وروى محمد عنه عن أبي يوسف أنه طاهر غير مطهر للأحداث كالخل, which is the position which we quoted. This is more detailed position. What it said in ظاهر الرواية أن الماء المستعمل طاهر. Sorry, I had this in mind. Above when it says طاهر, it's طاهر in and of itself, but is it مطهر? Can you reuse it for wudu or ghusl? No. So that's the position. طاهر غير مطهر. This is the correct position, right? للأحداث. So غير مطهر للأحداث, right? كالخل, like vinegar. You get it on your clothes, no problem, right? But can you make wudu with it? No, right? وهو الصحيح وبه أخذ مشايخ العراق, right? And so it is similar to the position that I mentioned earlier from Sadr Husamuddin, but it seems like that position seems to suggest that it's tahir and mutahir. But no, this is the one. It's tahir غير mutahir. That's the position, right? Okay, so then he says, well, musta'mal, what is considered to be ma musta'mal? The ikhtilaf on this point. He says, well, musta'malu kullu ma'in uzila bihi hadathun aw istu'mila fil badan, as it says in the matan. Right, so he says, well, musta'malu in the sharh, kullu ma'in uzila bihi hadath, where some sort of hadath has been removed. For example, you have wudu, right, and so there's the removal of hadath, and then there's actual qurba, like an actual act of worship. Let's say you don't have wudu, it's hot, and you've got a container, you got two containers, and you get a handful of water and you just wash your face to cool yourself down, right? Done. That water's collected there. So that part of your wudu has been done, even if you don't intend it, and even if you don't intend it as wudu, right? You don't intend wudu, you're not even thinking, you just wash your face, and let's say you just wash your arms, right? And that water's collected now, right? So that's all you do, and then later on you go and you just, you wash your hands because you've had a meal and you just happen to wipe your head, right? And and then later you wash your feet, right? It's been a hard day's work, whatever. You wash your feet. All that water that's been collected, even though you've not intended wudu, the fact that that water has flowed over the limbs that you're washing wudu and you've wiped your head, right? That moisture, that water and all the droplets that come from it have removed your hadith. You now have wudu, whether you intended it or not. The fact, because the hukum is what? فَاغْسِلُوا وُجُوهَكُمْ وَأَيْدِيَكُمْ إِلَى الْمَرَافِقِ. It's just washing, not necessarily intending first. So that has removed the hadith, you have wudu. So he says, وَالْمُسْتَعْمَلْ كُلُّ مَاءٍ أُزِيلَ بِهِ حَدَث. That hadith has been removed from it, which is here, this situation. وَإِنْ لَمْ يَكُنْ بِنِيَّةِ الْقُرْبَةِ. Right? Even if it's not with the niyyah of qurba, drawing closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The same is, let's say, imagine someone someone has a shower, right? Let's say someone's in janaba, and so that's why he used the word hadith and he left it as indefinite because it includes asghar and akbar. Let's say someone is in janaba, right? But there's no najasa on their body. They washed the najasa off beforehand and they just got delayed, whatever, and now they're going to perform a ghusl, right? And the person doesn't make an intention at all. He just goes in a rush and just washes his whole body once, gets the water flowing over it. Done. If that, that's the hadith covered. Yeah. So same thing. Oh, so that's the first point. Removal of the hadith asghar or akbar, obviously without any najasa being present. أو استعمل في البدن, or it's been على وجه القربة, as it says here, or it's been used on the body with the intention of drawing closer to Allah. So you have wudu and then you go make another wudu ala al-wudu, right? And you collect that water. It's musta'mal, it's used. Even though, let's say, you haven't removed any hadith because you have wudu, right? But the fact that you made an intention to draw closer to Allah, that removes your sins, is become musta'mal, right? So he says, أو استعمل في البدن, قيد به لأن غسالة الجامدات كالقدور والثياب لا تكون مستعمل. Before we go along, this word غسالة, فعالة, right? غسالة, it means that which the remnant water from washing this. So all the drops of water and everything, all that remnant water is you call that a غسالة. So he says قيد به أو قيد به, with the fa'il being Imam al-Quduri, لأن so قيد بالبدن, right? So you a qurba, right? A qurba on the body, right? لأن غسالة الجامدات كالقدور والثياب لا تكون مستعملة. If you wash your car, you collect that water, right? It's not musta'mal, right? Because no hadith has been removed from it and it hasn't been used on the body. Even if you intend, like I intend to keep my car clean, as a way of appreciating the blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So, the intention, that would make it a qurba, but because it's not on the body, it's not the same. على وجه القربة وإن لم يزل به حدث, even if no hadith is removed by that washing. So when you have wudu and you make wudu again, or you have wudu and then you go perform a ghusl, right? Like a Friday ghusl, let's say, in janaba, and at the beginning you make wudu, right? But then when you wash again, the water that goes over, if you to wash your arm again, for example, with the intention, there's a qurba there, so it's musta'mal. Okay. قال في الهداية هذا قول أبي يوسف, right? وقيل هو قول أبي حنيفة أيضا. وقال محمد, he has a different position, لا يصير مستعملا إلا بإقامة القربة, right? That only by actually performing a qurba, doing something which is a qurba, meaning an act of worship, an act, through the worship itself or its intention, you get closer to Allah, right? إلا بإقامة القربة. Why? لأن الاستعمال بانتقال النجاسة الآثام إليه, right? وإنما تزال بالقرب. So he says, so Imam Muhammad would say that someone just happens to wash his hands and face because it's hot and that water's collected, uh, we'd say that no, look, hadith has been removed from it. But because if he now just washes his arms, wipes his head, washes his feet, he has wudu, even though he wasn't even thinking about wudu when he washed his face, right? So Imam Muhammad said, no, that's not qurba, that's not mustamal, because you need to have a qurba there, and that's done with an intention, because when what is used by way of a qurba, an act of worship drawing closer to Allah, that removes sins, and that's what affects the water. That's what he's saying. لأن الاستعمال, so the classification of being used comes how بانتقال نجاسة الآثام إليه, comes through the transference of the impurity of the water. But because it's not a physical impurity, it's not classed as like khabath. It's just, it removes the tahuriya of the water, not the tahiriya, as one of the fuqaha would say. Okay, and then he says وإنما تزال هي بالقرب. وأبو يوسف رضي الله عنه يقول إسقاط الفرض مؤثر أيضا. This is why he said كل ماء أزيل به حدث. That's his position, isn't it? Right? So removing the hadith, the fard, is also has an effect. فيثبت فيثبت الفساد. Yeah. فيثبت الفساد بالأمرين جميعا. Right? So basically the changing fasad here means changing the water from tahir mutahhir to just tahir غير مطهر. Both matters have an effect. The intention of qurba and removing some hadith. Okay. وقال أبو النصر الأقطع, right, one of the student of Imam al-Quduri, who said he's got a sharh on it. هذا الذي ذكره هو الصحيح من مذهب أبي حنيفة ومحمد وفي الهداية, he says. So that's that done. So this is the madhab of Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Muhammad, right? So both, right? Hadith and qurba. Okay, so at which point, here's the question, at which point does this water gain the hukum of musta'mal, right? You get a handful of it, you put it to your face, is it musta'mal there? Well, it's touched your skin, it's flowed over you, shouldn't it be musta'mal there? So he says no, right? He says ومتى يصير مستعملا الصحيح أنه متى زايل العضو, when it leaves. So you're washing it, and when the water flows down, and as soon as it comes off, it drips off the limb. متى زايل العضو يصير صار مستعملا. At that point it becomes مستعمل. لأن سقوط الاستعمال قبل الانفصال للضرورة ولا ضرورة بعده. Because saying that it's مستعمل, that hukum is dropped. We're not, we're saying, look, it can't be musta'mal as long as it's on the limb, because you have the necessity of wiping over. Let's say you get a handful of water, you wipe your hand, and you got to wash the rest of your arm. And how you can do that? By rubbing, right? Especially if it's a really small amount of water. So there's a necessity, a need to keep that same hukum of tahara there. But once it's left the limb, right? Once it's left the limb by falling off, it's that hukum isn't there. What you can do, however, Hakim al-Shahid mentions, and Imam Ibn Abdin quotes this in the Hashia, that let's say you washed your hand, you get a lot of water, and you've poured it down your arm, and there's still a lot of it, and you get that, and it's still that moisture, and you wipe your head with it, for example, transferring it from one limb to another. Is it still tahir mutahhir? Yes, it is. It doesn't become musta'mal at that point. So here, when it leaves the limb, it falls off and it lands on your clothes, or lands on the floor or in a container, at that point it's musta'mal. So ولا ضرورة بعده, there's no necessity after it leaves the limb. Okay. So next we have julud. We have the hukum of skins when you slaughter and sacrifice an animal. So he says مطلب في حكم الجلود وكل إهاب, what's إهاب وهو الجلد قبل الدباغة. So and there's a point to this, because Imam al-Shafi'i, no, I believe it's Imam Malik, he says that all of these things based on a hadith that the najis, so they can't be, they're not purified. And he uses a hadith, and the Hanafi said no, the wording in the hadith uses ihab, and that by definition is every jild, every animal skin which hasn't been purified, hasn't been dried or whatever, right? So he says وكل إهاب was إهاب وهو الجلد قبل الدباغة. So dibagha, the process of it's a process of drying out the skin and preventing it from rotting, right? So it's whatever. There's many approaches. All of them are valid. Yeah. فإذا دبغ صار أديما, right? And when it's been purified, then it's classed as leather, adim, right? So كل إهاب دبغ فقد طهر. Was in the matan. I believe that's the wording of a hadith, right? إذا دبغ الإهاب فقد طهر in Sahih Muslim. So he says دبغ بما يمنع النتن والفساد. So any treatment that's done to it which prevents the natan, this really strong smell, and fasad, decomposing further, right? ولو دباغة حكمية, even if it's an effective type of dibagha where you're not using any chemicals or liquids or anything like that. كالتتريب, like using soil. I don't know the processes, but they use soil to do this. with tashmis, and putting it in the sun, right? لحصول المقصود بها, because what you intend from dibagha occurs with this, right? That's why you can go, like, you can buy sheepskin, and you could, it's quite common, in the Middle East. You go to a mosque and you'll find that there'll be a sheepskin, rug. They'll chop the head off, and the rest is, tanned and washed, and people pray in it and pray on it, right? You can either wear it or you can pray on it, and it's fine, right? وما يطهر بالدباغة يطهر بالذكاة هداية. Right, there's a bigger mas'ala here. It says everything that becomes purified with dibagha, so a sheep, right? So this is like if the animal dies and you cut his skin off, it's just died for whatever reason, you cut his skin off, you need dibagha to purify it. So Sahib al-Hidayah has a position that if you, zakat is basically what the Islamic slaughter. If that's done, he says it becomes tahir as well. وإذا طهر جازت الصلاة مستترا فيه. You can pray in it, meaning wearing it, right? وكذا الصلاة عليه, right? Also valid. والوضوء منه, like you take that leather and you make it into a container, and then you pour the water out, right? It's done. إلا جلد الخنزير, right? Now this is so this is the position, because it's najis al-ain. فلا يطهر للنجاسة العينية, meaning everything else is najis because of the moisture on it, or various reasons, right? But human skin cannot be purified, because Allah has honored human beings, and to take human skin and then use it for something else, it's removing that honor. لقد كرمنا بني آدم. كرم, it's a long term, like there's a permanent honoring, as opposed to ikram al-dayf, honor your guest. So that's a temporary thing that he comes, and then the takreem is like a permanent state, right? So human skin, you bury it, right? But so he said, but with a pig, it's impurity, because it is فإنه رجس, the Quran says, and أو لحم خنزير, and there's the ikhtilaf. What is the فإنه, what does that go back to the lahm? So would that affect its skin? Would that affect its bones? Or does it go back to the whole thing? And that's the stronger position. It goes back to the whole pig. So it's rijs, it's najasa ainiya, like intrinsic impurity. So he says, وجلد الآدمي للكرامة الإلهية, right? Allah's honor does. وألحقوا بهما ما لا يحتمل الدباغة كفأرة صغيرة, like a really tiny mouse. You can't put it through that process, the dibagha process. So they say, okay, that also won't be purified. وأفاد كلامه طهارة جلد الكلب, right? والفيل, because elephant, Imam Muhammad considered it to be like, was it a big mouse, right? So the same hukum, same applies to it. So they're not halal to eat. So he says, so doesn't now this position he's saying, right? وأفاد كلامه طهارة جلد الكلب. That the if you go to slaughter, if you were to get a dog's thing, and tan it is purified. والفيل وهو المعتمد. That's fine, right? وشعر الميتة. Does he mention the other position? Yeah, there's actually an ikhtilaf on, for example, what you can't eat, and if you just sacrifice it, would it purify it or not? And would it purify the meat? So is the meat, does it remain tahir and najis? I believe Sahib al-Hidayah went with one position. There's a long discussion on this in the Hashi of Imam Ibn Abidin, and I believe the rajih is that no, for if you to slaughter a dog Islamically, would it make the meat tahir, not halal but tahir? And the position I believe is not, right. But there is ikhtilaf on this position. He says, وَفَادَ كَلَامُهُ طَهَارَةَ جِلْدِ الْكَلْبِ وَالْفِيلِ وَهُوَ الْمُعْتَمَدْ. That's what he's going with. وَشَعْرُ الْمَيْتَةِ الْمَجْزُوز, right, which has been cut off, right? So any dead animal, the head that's been cut off. وأراد غير الخنزير لنجاسة جميع أجزائه. That's why when you get brushes which are najis, people use brushes. Sometimes they even use it on food, right? Brushes that are derived from like boar hair and stuff like this, boar bristles and these sorts of things, hair brushes, right? The najis. If you got a boar bristle brush and you come out and you start combing your beard with it or whatever, you're transferring that najasa, right? So because why then the najasati jami'i ajza'ihi, because all of its parts are najis. ورخص في شعره للخرازين للضرورة لأنه لا يقوم غيره مقامه عندهم, right. And a kharaz is basically someone that makes, so this was a position that the school did allow in some places, making sandals and these sorts of things, because of the strength of its leather and whatever. Some of the ulama, it is a valid position in the school. Some of the ulama said yes. There's a certain situation. If you look up Tuhfat al-Muluk, it's in that text, right? Because nothing else can take its form. Okay. وعن أبي يوسف أنه كرهه لهم أيضا, and Abu Yusuf didn't like that, right? So there's actually, like he mentioned in the ikhtiyar, mentioned the position that Imam Abu Yusuf would say that this tanning or dibagha actually does purify pig skin, right? And this is a useful position because, for example, there's a mas'ala of isqatul qada. If you have misprayers in the past, can you use another position in the madhab other than the rajih position to remove the necessity of making them up? For example, if someone has missed, I'm not talking about one or two, like someone's been a bit lazy, whatever, they missed witr a couple of times, you're going to tell them no, go make it up, right? But when they're piled on for years, right, sometimes decades, someone hasn't prayed them, right? Can you find him? Can you use a rukhsa to say, okay, fine, you don't have to do this, just to make it easy on the person? Yes, there's, and something that Ibn Abdin does discuss in the Hashia, and so isqatul qada. So, for example, with witr, the sahiban, they said that it's a sunnah and not wajib. So, could you use that? Yes. Here, you also have a situation where people pray with pigskin belts, right? Most belts they use cowhide because it's really a lot thicker and stronger. But sometimes you can go buy, say, a pair of trousers from a shop, and it comes with a belt, and not everyone checks and whatever, and you start, you pray a few prayers with it and you don't realize. So can you use that position of Imam Abu Yusuf, that it's tahir to remove the need for repeating those qadas? Yes, right. You can do that. Allahu a'lam. Okay, so he says وَعَظْمُهُ وَقَرْنُهُ. So وشعر الميتة وعظمه sorry وعظمها and the bones of the maita and its horns, right? Al-khali عن الدسومة, which doesn't have any sort of fat or any on it, because that's najis. وكذا كل ما لا تحله الحياة منها كحافر وعصبها على المشهور. Same thing with everything which there's no life within it. If you're to cut it, you don't feel pain, right? Such as its hoof and its tendons, right? على المشهور طاهر, right? It's طاهر. وكذا شعر الإنسان وعظمه هداية. So, for example, I got asked a question once about bone broth, right? Or you get these ox or whatever, these sorts of things, where they'll make broth from the bones of animals. Is that halal? And obviously, the answer was no. The answer I gave was no, but that's not because of the bones, right? If you could get bones that have been stripped of all flesh and fat and everything, right? If it's stripped of all that, of a cow that's not been slaughtered, let's say they shot it in the head, right? And you can get the bones, its ribs or whatever, and there's no fat on it, there's no cartilage or whatever. It's just the bones, and you boil it. The meat is obviously going to be haram, but you get the bone, you strip it of everything, you boil it, whatever. Can you use that broth? Yes. So why did I say no? Because of the industrial process. Because we might say that because it's tahir, even though it's not been slaughtered, the bones are tahir, the hooves are tahir. But because of the whole process in industry where they do things to make it as as quick and as efficient as possible, they'll shoot an animal, and the butchers, they'll take the meat off, sell the meat separately, and then you're going to get bones with they're not going to be meticulous in taking off every bit of flesh, are they? Right? So all that gets boiled, right? And sometimes there might be large amounts of it, so it's that which will make it najis, right? So therefore the thing. But as for the bones themselves, they would be, if you could find something like that with no meat on it, great, that would be tahir. Okay, great. um we've got a quick mas'ala. Let's cover this, right? It doesn't require much analysis. So it's about the wells. So it says مطلب في مسائل الآبار, or you can say أبيار as well, إذا وقع فيها روث أو حيوان, uh, um, if any sort of dung or an animal falls into it. So what's the score? It says إذا وقعت في البئر الصغيرة نجاسة مائعة مطلقا أو جامدة غليظة بخلاف الخفيفة. Okay, so if in a small well, so small body of water, right, najasa falls in, whether it's any sort of liquid, blood or urine or something, or if it's thick, solid, something thick and solid. بخلاف الخفيفة, or something, as opposed to something that's light, that'll break up easily, right? So something that's thick and it won't break easily, but بخلاف الخفيفة كالبعر والروث, right? Such as al-ba'r. This is domestic cows. Their dung is called that, and roth is horse, right? It's from horses generally. كالبعر والروث فقد جعل القليل منها عفوا للضرورة, right? Because this small amount is excused, right, by necessity. Why is it a necessity? Because outside, like in the desert and these places, people will dig wells where it's convenient, and they didn't in the past, they didn't always have a wall around it or a casing, or a grill or a gutter or something, so a grill to prevent anything. And people take the animals, they pull out the water and they give the animals water there, and they're going to defecate. You can't control that. And then the winds come and they blow it all, and sometimes it falls into the water. So if it's a small amount like this, every time something small like this comes in, you're going to say the whole well is najis. It's just mashaqqa, difficulty for people. So they say that's excused, right? And there are positions like in the Maliki school, like for example, the urine of like sheep or whatever, it's excused. Imam Muhammad had this position, right? Of certain types of najasat of the madhab being excused at the tahir. So here, for ease and facilitation for people, they say it's excused, right? So then he says, so إذا وقعت, so where's the جواب الشرط فلا تفسدوا إلا إذا كثر, right? So the rest are جمل معترضات. إذا وقعت في البئر نجاسة, whether it's liquid, solid, but that will break up easily. فلا تفسدوا إلا إذا كثر, unless it's a large amount. Why? What's a large amount? وهو ما يستكثره الناظر في المروي عن أبي حنيفة, going back to his أصل رأي المبتلى, right? وعليه الاعتماد, and that's the solid position. ولا فرق بين الرطب واليابس في الصحيح, right? And whether it's wet or dry, moist or dry, no problem, meaning fresh or otherwise, right? والصحيح والمنكسر, and whether it's as it's come out of the animal or it's been dried up a bit and broken into smaller pieces, it's fallen in, same hukum. لأن الضرورة تشمل الكل كما في الهداية, right? And sometimes it's a necessity, like he says that if someone's milking a cow and and the cow decides to defecate, and some of the cow part, it goes into the milk. If you take it out straight away, it's fine, right? And okay, right. When you read this and when we read this and we look at it, I think what, I wouldn't touch that milk, right? But necessity, and sometimes it's a case of either starve or die or basically have this, right? So these ahkam are there for the taysir for people, right? So he says, لأن الضرورة تشمل, okay. نزحت, so what happens when the najasa falls in? It's muhaqqaq, it's fallen in. After you remove the najasa, what do you do? نزحت البئر, you empty the well, right? It's removed fully. والمراد ماؤها. So he says, when he says the well is empty, now you have to look at, this is where a good grasp of language helps. What's the bi'r? The bi'r is the well, meaning this hole in the ground with the walls of it, and it comes up and you have a pulley and everything. That whole thing is considered the well. The water in it is not the well. The water is water, right? So in the Arabic language. So he says, but why does he say that? Why doesn't he just say in the matan, nuziha ma'ul bi'r? So this is for tajawuz. It's like being brief in language. You don't even want to spell every single thing out. You get it? So he says nuzihat al-bi'r, meaning nuziha ma'ul bi'r wal muradu ma'uha. That's what he's saying. Ma'ul bi'r, the water is removed. We're not going to start pulling out the bricks of the well, right? من ذكر المحل وإرادة الحال. So this is مجاز مطلق. Sorry, مطلق. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد. Was going out my head now. This is majaz mursal, opposite of mutlaq. This is majaz mursal, right? A type of majaz where you mention the mahal, the place of something, but what you're actually intending is the thing which resides within that place. And there's 16, they call these alaqat, the alaqat of al-majaz al-mursal, which are, iradatul lazim, itlaqul lazim, iradatul malzoom, and itlaqul malzoom, iradatul lazim. There's 16 of them which you mentioned, which are studied in balagha. So he says, وَكَانَ نَزْحُهَا, وكان النزح ما فيها من الماء طهارة أي مطهرا لها, right? بإجماع السلف. So when this well has been completely emptied, it's purified by that process. So when all the water is taken out, it purifies the well, as we'll say, and then the walls, the brick, the mud underneath, the bucket that goes in, the wire, the pulley system, even the hand of the person who's pulling it out, because all of this is, because the water does come into contact with all these things. So he's saying it's tahara hukmiya for everything, right? Bijma'i salaf, then he says, wa masailul abari mabniyatun. So all of these masail are based on, oops, so, yeah. Uh-oh. Excuse me. Ah, there you are. Okay. مسائل الآبار مبنية على اتباع الآثار دون القياس. So they're based on the riwayat, because these situations will have come to the Sahaba, will have come to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the qiyas is no, you can't purify that well, because every time you take water out, the walls are najis. When the water goes back in, it's going to become najis because of the najas of the walls, right? And the mud and everything. So we're leaving qiyas here just for practicality. This is istihsan, right? هداية. وفي الجوهرة وفي قوله طهارة لها إشارة إلى أنه يطهر الوحل, the mud, والأحجار, the stones, والدلو والرشاء, right? So the pulley system, the rope. ويد النازح, the person who's doing this all, right? وهذا إذا كانت النجاسة غير حيوان. So this is if it's not an animal. أما حكم الحيوان فذكره بقوله فإن ماتت فيها. So if it's najasa that's not an animal, you got to empty it all out, right? And so wells are of different types. Some wells that if you empty all the water out, it will take some time, but the water will come back from underground. And some which are close to rivers and other sources, like as Imam Muhammad found when he went to Iraq, when he went to certain place in Iraq, where as soon as you remove the water, it's instantly replaced, because it's just it's replenished immediately. So they have a different set of ahkam. So, but if an animal falls in, certain small animals are given the hukum. If it's just died and it's fallen in, or it falls in and drowns, it's given the hukum of a small, a different hukum, not the same as blood or urine or something falling in, right? So he says فإن مات فيها أو خارجها وألقيت فيها فأرة أو عصفورة أو صعوة. So mouse, sparrow, صعوة is like a small bird. It says got a red head, very similar to a sparrow in size. Okay, from مصباح المنير. أو سودانية. What's that? طويرة, a little bird, تصغير of طائرة. طويلة الذنب, long tail, على قدر قبضة, which is about a fist length, right, the tail. From مغرب, another dictionary. أو سام بتشديد الميم. أبرص, which is what الوزع, a gecko, like a lizard, right? والعوام تقول أبو باريس, from أبرص, right? أو ما قاربها في الجثة. So these animals and birds, or that which is similar to them in size, like a ferret, for example, right? نزح منها بعد إخراج الواقع فيها. That's the important point, because there's no point emptying the water and the thing which made it najis staying in there, because whenever the next set of water comes in, it's going to become najis again. So you got to get the animal out, and then what you do, نزح منها ما بين 20 دلوا إلى 30 دلوا, right? Between 20, that's the wajib, and the 30 is up to 30 is mustahab. That's what's removed. That water is taken out and just spilled away, and that's the hukum of the tathir of the well, right? So he says العشرين بطريق الإيجاب وثلاثين بطريق الاستحباب هداية. وفي الجوهرة, so in جوهرة نيرة هذا إذا وهذا إذا لم تكن الفأرة هاربة من الهرة ولا مجروحة. This is when the mouse isn't fleeing from a cat, nor if it's injured. Why? Because the fight or flight reaction kicks in, and animals, when even people, they urinate in times of fear, right? So it's likely that the mouse has been there, and then it'll have urinated, and traces of that najas will be on it. So, or if it's injured, it'll be bleeding, right? So that blood will go into it, into the well. Okay. What happened then? ينزح. So if it's not fleeing or injured, ينزح. جميع الماء وإن خرجت حية. even if it comes out alive, right? Because it's not the death of the animal, it's the najasa from the urine or the blood. لأنها تبول إذا كانت هاربة, and that's very common. وكذا الهرة إذا كانت هاربة من الكلب, same thing, right? أو مجروحة, the blood. لأن البول والدم نجاسة مائعة, it's a liquid impurity. انتهى باختصار, right? ثم قال so this is 20 to 30 mouse, sparrow, these sorts of things. وحكم الفأرتين والثلاث والأربع كالواحدة. So 2, 3 or 4 mice or some animal of that size, we treat it as 1, 20 to 30. والخمس كالهرة إلى التسع. So 5 to 9 mice, let's say a group of them, someone chase them, or a few cats chase them, and they're all running together and then they're falling into a well, like that. والعشر كالكلب, right? وهذا عند أبي يوسف, so they're like a dog. Abu Yusuf says الثلاث كالهرة والست كالكلب, different اجتهاد, that's fine. بحسب كبر الحيوان وصغره. I found in my edition of the Hidayah they did the ضبط كبر الحيوان وصغره, right? And no, كبر and صغر, this is when you're using it for, he says, Imam Maydani says this is when you're using this for age, but we're talking about size, it's with the فعل, right? So وكبر الحيوان وصغره, والكبر والصغر بالضم الأول وإسكان الثاني للجثة, for the body, right? وهو المراد هنا. وبكسر الأول كبر صغر وفتح الثاني للسن for age, right? قال في الجوهرة ومعنى المسألة إذا كان الواقع كبيرا والبئر كبيرة فالعشر مستحبة وإن كانا صغيرين فالاستحباب دون ذلك, right? So the bigger the thing, then the larger the mustahab figure, the second figure. So 20 is wajib, 30 is mustahab. So it's like that. So the larger it is, it's going to be like that. وإن كان وإن كان أحدهما صغيرا والآخر كبيرا فخمس مستحبة وخمس دونها في الاستحباب, right? It's like that. So if one of them is bigger, the animal, and the well is smaller, then then 5 is mustahab, and another 5, a smaller 5. Where is the masala? Let me go back. Right. So in كان الواقع كبيرا والبئر كبيرة. So if the animal is big and the well is bigger, is big, فالعشر مستحبة, then an additional 10 is mustahab. And if one is big and the other small, like the animal is bigger and the well is smaller, or the other way around, it says وإن كان أحدهما صغيرا والآخر كبير فخمس مستحبة وخمس دونها في الاستحباب, right? So then 5 is mustahab, right? And this 5 is less for the istihbab. So instead of having the 10, for istihbab, but because one is small, then the istihbab is reduced by 5. That's what he's saying. وَإِمَاتَتْ فِيهَا حَمَامَةٌ. So let's call it a day there, and we will continue inshallah ta'ala on Thursday. Barakallahu feekum jami'an. And if there are any questions, just do throw a few questions here and there on the forum, and let's get that active a little bit, and we'll take it from here inshallah ta'ala. Okay, so alhamdulillah, hopefully this recording is going well, and it'll be posted on the forum. There'll be a link to it inshallah. Okay, take care, keep in your du'as please. Wa jazakumullahu khairan wa fikum. Okay, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.